What I'd like right now is for all of you out of shape, ugly, do-nothing sweat hogs to keep the noise down so I could show you what a real pro wrestling legend looks like. Rick Rude was called Ravishing, and he radiated charisma and toughness. He's a WWE Hall of Famer, but his in-ring career there was actually rather brief. He was an Intercontinental Champion and fought for the world title. But could he have lasted longer in the WWF? Even carried the company up to the Attitude Era? That's what we find out on today's show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rebooking the Territory. I am your host, Luke Thayer. This is the show where we go back and change wrestlers' history, or maybe a storyline of a pay-per-view you loved, or just a career, matches. We just want to go back and change it to the way we wish it had happened. And so today, my guest, he's a return guest. He's an incredible comedian and actor, Ray Marshall. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, bud.
Oh, so good to have you back. We've talked in past a little bit about your wrestling history, but today we're going to be your history with wrestling, maybe is a better way to put it. We've got a particular guest or topic, I should say, today, and that's Ravishing Rick Rude. And was he somebody that was even in your orbit when you were growing up, or did you find out about him later?
No, he was. And I remember, you pay attention to a guy like that because, you can't ignore him. He's coming out with women's faces painted on his tights. And he was really one of the first people to do, legitimate crowd work, like he did the insulting the fans deal. He didn't scream at them. He did insult them. He got, as we say in the biz, cheap heat. You know how that is, right? Just insulting the fans and, insulting people and things of that nature, insulting their weight and calling them sweat hogs, which is, I don't know if it's a term that he coined, but I'm going to give it to him until somebody else claims it. But yes, I was absolutely aware of him. But one thing that sticks out to me as a kid, I remember looking at Rick Rude and thinking, this guy's in great shape, but he's small, which he wasn't. As you become an adult and you realize what a normal sized man does look like, Rick Rude doesn't fall into small, he doesn't fall into normal, but it was just that these massive guys were all over the roster. And that's what was being pushed at the time. He wasn't a Hogan. He wasn't a Warrior. He didn't have this persona around him. And he's probably standing next to Hogan and Warrior, probably somewhat close to the same size, maybe a tad bit smaller. But I just remember how wrestling was booked back then. And me being as a kid, just looking at him as, oh, this is like one of the small guys for the middle of the roster. But that's the way they booked him, even though I think his talent far exceeded that. Yeah,
he's an interesting, just speaking about the body alone, because, not to objectify this man, but that's kind of his gimmick.
He was.
Part of it is he just has this incredibly small waist, which you do not see in a lot of guys, especially of this era, because he's 6'3". I'm guessing he's probably somewhere in the 240 range. Yeah. He had a lot of muscle mass on him, but he was probably supposed to be a naturally slender man. Yeah. Whereas like Hogan is, especially at this time, he's like 6'7", 305, 310, somewhere in that neighborhood. And even some of the shorter
chemically assisted.
Yeah. Well, they all were, I'm pretty sure Rick Rude was, if it was just himself, he would have been a skinny dude. Yeah. And probably some sort of assistance there, which, I think that's probably well documented. I don't think we're speaking out of school with saying he was chemically assisted, but, the types of sized men that we would see in there that you think, oh, these guys are small. If you put Rick Rude in as he looked then, 1988, 1989, 90, you put him in AEW today, he would be 6 inches taller than a lot of the guys and probably outweighed them by 40 pounds or so. He would look gigantic next to these guys, especially just muscular. If you put him up against, even someone like Dolph Ziggler, who's in great shape, is a great wrestler, great performer, he would be 3 or 4 inches taller than him. You know, even Shawn Michaels of the 90s, you know, Shawn Michaels, 6 feet, 6'1", if you're stretching it a little bit.
Yeah.
He's still 2 inches taller than that, 3 inches taller than him. So,
right.
Yeah.
And not to jump ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't even have to go that far. If it was just a few more years right into that Attitude Era, because you remember when Hogan was gone, when Warrior was gone, that's when Michaels came on. That's Bret Hart came on. You know, a little bit later, Stone Cold. That all of those guys are either his size or smaller, and
Yes.
you know, like he was like maybe 5-6 years ahead of his time. 5 or 6 years. If he could have just slid that timeline a little further, he would have been in the Attitude Era. He would have been perfect for it. You know, he was ahead of his time. You know, guys running around with this. He wasn't a gimmick. Like, he was just a cocky guy who did it really well. He wasn't a plumber. He wasn't, you know, telling kids to take their vitamins and say their prayers, which is fine. But, you know, it was getting cartoonish, and he wasn't doing any of that. He was just like in the wrong decade, man.
Yeah, he's got an interesting career because, you know, we'll kind of get into this here, but just my personal experience first finding out about him, I'm pretty sure that it was WrestleMania 6 is the very first time I ever saw Ravishing Rick Rude. And, you know, he's going up against Jimmy Snuka in that match. It's not a super long match. But, you know, WrestleMania 6 was kind of my introduction to wrestling in general. You know, he's going on right before Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, my favorite match of all time. They're right before that, you know, him and Jimmy Snuka. And just like even Jimmy Snuka would have been like the body guy of the early 80s. You know, he was even in the late 80s still in tremendous shape.
Right.
But he felt old and Rick Rude felt fresh.
Yeah.
And obviously he beat Jimmy Snuka, you know, and that's really one of those matches where you go, this must just be getting you guys a paycheck because there's no real need to have Rick Rude, Jimmy Snuka. But it's just seeing him, that package of WrestleMania 6, like you kind of alluded to earlier, he had this airbrushing on all of his tights.
Yeah,
it's always faces. Yeah. A lot of times the faces were on the crotch. Sometimes he'd be on the butt, but a lot of times the faces on the crotch. Yeah, it's very 80s. And his hair, that's another thing that stands out to me.
Oh man, before he cut that hair.
Yes.
I don't know what happened there, but that was one of the worst career advice. Him cutting that hair, but it was gorgeous hair, and it should have came into wherever he was. And then he, you know, cut it off, and he was in the suit, and that's for other reasons because of the injury and so on. So we'll get into that later. But that hair is, God, he should have had Lloyd's of London insure that hair as well as the rest of his body.
It's really interesting because looking back on it, you know, and we're going to spend a couple minutes on this hair, by the way.
Of course.
Like, it's one of the, you know, if you talk about Rick Rude, there's certain things that come to mind. One, heel persona, obviously, the body, the tights, but the hair and the mustache.
Yeah.
He's got a Magnum PI kind of look to him, which is, you know, 80s. It's never mentioned. People don't ever talk about like, well, he's got that Magnum PI look, but he really, in a lot of ways, I'm surprised they didn't even push that kind of gimmick on him of some sort of, you know, Tom Selleck like character, you know, where he's doing a Hawaii theme or something like that.
Well, I mean, you got to ask yourself, I mean, how much effort was given into guys like that, like those middle card type of guys when you got Hogan running? Because, you know, all this creative stuff has to be passed through Vince. It still is that way to this day. You know, like, it seems obvious, but then a lot of things seem obvious in wrestling that don't occur or don't happen. And you're just scratching your head like, well, what's going on over there? But I'm sure that was run by Vince, and or somebody was just like, yeah, we don't have time for that. He's just a guy on the mid card, and he's doing all right. So, you know, he really didn't need any extra. Maybe if this wore off or you wanted to turn him face, then maybe that was the perfect move to make. But as far as his run in WWF, just being this cocky, arrogant, wife-stealing kind of guy, he really didn't need Bobby Heenan. You know, you think of Bobby Heenan, you think of guys who can't talk, who can't get a rise out of the fans. And Rude wasn't that, but, you know, he had Bobby Heenan, which was, you know, I think an embarrassment of riches there. Like, if you got one of those guys, you don't really need them to be paired together. But, you know, that it is what it is.
Yeah, I know. For me, a lot of times when I look back, you know, I think I see things differently now than I did at the time. And Bobby Heenan is one of those things where, as a kid, it always felt like everybody that Bobby Heenan managed was, you know, now I would call them mid card or low card guys. Yeah. Occasionally there would be somebody else that was kind of an uppercut, but it always felt like, he's going to manage the guy that is going to lose. He's there for, you know, he can't get Hulk Hogan, so he's going to pick somebody to try to pick a fight with Hulk Hogan. Right. But it's going to be way overmatched. And with Rick Rude, that's when you're right. They don't need each other. Yeah. But to have them together is pretty amazing. Like, I think you have something where, you know, and he did have some upper mid card matches there in his, you know, WWF run, but he didn't really have anything with Hogan. He did a little bit with Warrior, but a lot of it, you know, and he wasn't even Memory, you know, just going back and looking, he really wasn't in the WWF for very long. No. He arrives in 87, and by 1990 or so, he's gone. So he's only really there for 3 years. So he makes a pretty big mark for 3 years. Right. But to get back to the hair and the mustache, because I'm not done with that hair yet. Is the hair. Bret Hart has talked about this, I think, where he goes, he'd always wet his hair down. So a lot of guys do that, where they wet all of their hair down. And Bret Hart, you know, as matches would go on and his hair would start to dry out, it would get frizzy and puffy. Yeah. Well, Rick Rude just went to the ring like that. Yeah. He was like, I'm not wetting this thing down. We're just going to the ring puffy. And he didn't ever seem to sweat, because I think it was oil that he put on his body, so it wasn't sweating. And his hair just stayed puffy the entire time. Yeah. And like I said, the Magnum PI mustache, the hair and the tights, it's all very late 80s, like mid-late 80s. That is just that's not a character that would have popped up 10 years later in the Attitude Era or the beginning of the Attitude Era. He would look completely out of place looking like that.
Aesthetically, yes. And you know, not for the body, it's just for the hair or the mustache. But what was coming out of his mouth, it can fit anywhere. It could fit right now, you know, if you're not hell bent on being PG, which, you know, WWE is. But he could fit, I think, in any time in wrestling. I think he was at a time where they didn't know what to do with him. And just to touch back on Bobby Heenan, I think the only reason Bobby Heenan was with guys that lose is Bobby Heenan should never be put with any face. He is so quick. There's just some guys that you hear talk and you're just like, they are head and shoulders above everybody else. Heenan's one of them. Stone Cold was one of them. I didn't appreciate Stone Cold for this as a child, because he came on when I was, 12, 13. And, you know, just his attitude and everything is what gravitated me towards him. But if you look back at a Stone Cold promo now, they're just so quick. They're just so sharp. They're just so real. And they're so damn insulting that they stand out. There's only a few handful of guys that are like that. Bobby Heenan was one of those. But at that time, a heel isn't getting a major push. He's not getting the title for a year solid. He's holding the title for the next good guy to come and beat them. That's the only thing they did with heels at the time. You know, that's like Brock Lesnar being there. And even to the audience, now you give somebody a heel, depending on what they're doing and what they're saying, the audience may just say, yeah, he's a heel, but yeah, we like these guys. That wasn't happening around the time of Heenan. So that's why he was just really coupled with the guys that were losing, because a heel back then couldn't be what a heel is now. It can't be the anti-hero bucking against the set. That started really with Stone Cold and Vince McMahon. But not to get off topic, but I was just fascinated with what you said about Bobby Heenan, because I always thought he was one of the all-time greats. He is like the architect for Heyman.
Oh, sure.
That's what. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think
he would work today. By the way, Bobby Heenan would work.
Of course,
Bobby Heenan is my favorite.
Is a mind, and they call him Bobby the Brain Heenan. I think that is the best nickname for any wrestling character ever, because that's what he was. He was so sharp. He was so quick. He would insult and on commentary, I think it goes for as far as humor goes, because he wasn't really like the likes of a JR. He was there for humor. For humor, I think it's Heenan, then it's Lawler. And I know a lot of people don't like Lawler for whatever other reasons. Like, he's got a lot of other stuff going on as far as, I'll leave that alone. But as far as his color commentary, I think it's Heenan, and I think it's Lawler, and I really don't think anyone else matches up as far as that goes.
Yeah, for sure. That's the thing. I'm not even diminishing Bobby Heenan. When I look back and I said, as a child, I just felt like he managed a bunch of losers. And I think that's part of what it's supposed to be. But even the people that I remember, I had to look up a little bit. I remember him with the Barbarian and Hercules. And I think he was even with the Red Rooster. And I also remember with Andre the Giant. So there's that where I was okay, that's you can't get bigger than Andre the Giant, both literally and figuratively. But I also remember him with the Brooklyn Brawler. And I think that's part of he's a bit of a goof, And even though looking back as an adult, I can go, this guy's the best. And, he took guys that probably would have done nothing or very little, and he made them something. And he could be doing that with people today.
Yeah.
But and then he was with Ric Flair for a little bit, and he was with Mr. Perfect. Obviously those are big names and, near top of the guard, if not the top of the card every show. So yeah, to see him with Rick Rude, very, very interesting kind of combination, because you would think right there, it's kind of something that Bobby Heenan didn't have a lot of, which is young, up and coming, especially when he first comes in, unknown to the WWF audience.
Yeah.
And there should be a rocket strap to this duo here.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a guy that you actually can push against the top faces of the company. Here's a guy that can go for Hogan and can go for, when Macho Man is a face, he can go against that type of guy. Obviously he does go against the Ultimate Warrior quite a bit. So there is that element that it's, as we get into the rebooking, we're going to maybe touch on that a little bit, because there certainly was that. Now he doesn't get to stay there for super long. And do you even remember him in WCW?
I don't. I do, but it was like a shell of his former self, and he actually continued on in WCW what he was doing in the WWE. I mean, his run wasn't really stopped by politics; it was stopped by a back injury, and I think that's what happened in 1990. He just couldn't go anymore. That's why he was paired with Generation X as a suit. And the protection policy or whatever, what have you, that continued on in WCW, but just he didn't have anything to do. As soon as an ex-WWF guy came over to WCW, they were put in the NWO, and then they were just swallowed up. He even still had the same suit. I don't even think he ever changed suits. It was still the same suit from WWE to WCW, and there weren't any good storylines to even run everybody in the NWO. And he was just there, kind of just taking up space. And that's all I really remember about his run in WCW when he got there.
Yeah, he's got, he kind of flip-flops back between WWF and WCW a little bit. He leaves in 1990 or so. A little dispute with Vince McMahon. He did have an injury and a little bit of a dispute. So he goes over to WCW once he's healed. He wrestles there, and he becomes the world champion. He's a U.S. champion and the world champion a couple times, and then is injured permanently. His back is injured during a match with Sting for, that world championship.
Yeah.
And that was 94. Then he's back to the WWF doing the DX thing. Then he's over to NWO doing the NWO thing, but it's no more wrestling. Like he is just completely, his body is just not going to hold up to that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a similar, when Shawn Michaels hurt his back, it's a similar type of deal where Shawn Michaels was in a match with the Undertaker, did some sort of flip, landed on the coffin wrong, kind of cut the edge of the coffin, caught his back. Well, Rick Rude had something similar where they had like this weird platform around the ring, and he caught Sting jumped out of the ring to him, and he caught him, and as he's falling back, catches his back on the corner of that wood platform, and kind of does the same thing that Shawn Michaels said. And Shawn Michaels basically told, you're not going to wrestle again. We see him come back years later. Now, Rick Rude, that happens to him in 94, and he passed away in 99. So just 5 years later, he's dead. And so there's no letting the body heal. I don't know if he could have ever come back the way Shawn Michaels came back, but he was probably maybe putting his body through a little bit more with substances than maybe Shawn Michaels was at the time as well.
Yeah, and word is he was training for a comeback. Yeah, around the 1999 time. Yeah.
So it's very possible, because you just think like that. Using that Shawn Michaels time frame, which any injury is different from person to person how they handle it. But Shawn Michaels was away for about 5 years. Yeah, comes back. Rick Rude's at that 5-year mark, and obviously he died of a accidental substance. Like he had multiple things, probably in a lot of pain stuff, probably some painkillers. That has a tendency to be one of the number one contributors to overdoses. Yeah. And so 40 years old, I was just shocked going back and looking at this, because when I was a kid, Rick Rude always looked 40 to me.
Yeah, he did. And even if now, because I was just catching myself up on the events of his career, and he always did, especially when he was in that suit and the latter parts of his run in WCW. It's like, this is a guy in his 30s. Like, what's going on? Like, but yeah, I thought the same thing. And now that I am closer to 40 than I am to 30, it's really like it's reminding you your mortality a little bit. Majority wrestlers. How many wrestlers die in their 40s? Like a lot of them. So I mean, it's scary a little bit.
Yeah, that especially through the late 90s through the early 2000s, there was like a 10-year period where, probably because there was a large number of substances being used. We've used the word substance a lot in this podcast, so let's be more specific. Painkillers, steroids, and other
recreational drugs, as we can say.
Recreational drugs, alcohol. There's a lot of that. And part of it is, you go, well, why, the guys from the 50s and 60s were drinking a lot and they lived a while. And well, part of that is they weren't doing the same type of wrestling. Right. So they weren't taking, the type of thing that happened to Rick Rude, happened to Shawn Michaels. They weren't doing that in the late 70s. Like superstar Billy Graham wasn't going to flip over a rope to anybody. And so, they might have been doing some of those things. So, but they weren't going through maybe the massive pain that some of these guys were doing. Also, just the number of dates that they were doing. Right. Touring
the WWF and what Vince did. I mean, taking it like on the road 300 days of the year. I mean, even if you're a performing artist, like a stand-up community where your body's not involved in the equation, that's tough. A lot of people can't do that forever. So that'll take definitely a toll on you. And then imagine adding to the mix, like you said, not just wrestling, but the type of wrestling they were doing, taking these bumps and going over the top rope and all that other stuff. You're definitely going to need something to get through that pain.
Oh, for sure. Like, as a comedian, I've toured, you've toured. Some of the worst part of being a traveling performer is just the travel.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's great to get away, but then it does begin to wear on a person. And it gets to the point where it's just like, man, I got to go to the next town, or, I got to spend this many number of hours on the road or on a flight. And, I have to think about packing, or I have to think about getting to the airport. I have to think time management, all of the stuff that people don't think about when they're thinking about performers. And these guys were having to do it. They're especially in some of the territory days, they're having to drive these things because they're not making enough for flights. Yeah. So you do your one night in one town, and then you got to drive 300 or 400 miles to the next town. You barely get any sleep. You've got to get up, and they're physical. So they have to train. You have to look the part. Yeah. You then have to make sure that you're getting to the match, doing the match, all of the stress that takes on your body. You might not get the sleep that you need for the next day. And so, yeah, it's not surprising that some of these guys, especially you throw in the steroids in there, and who knows what that's doing to bodies. Obviously it affects hearts. That heart is a muscle, so it does affect those type of things, especially when you're abusing steroids or HGH or, testosterone or anything they're pumping into their body to look that way. And a lot of those guys were falling off very, very young when we look back at it.
Yeah. And I also thought, looking into his backstory, I thought it was very interesting that he finished college. Like, he got his degree before he ever got into wrestling, and just some of the decisions that he made, like getting himself insured, getting his body insured. I thought that was a really smart move. And, and just to look back at his history, like, I don't know, maybe he was just a smart guy before he went to college, but you don't hear about a lot of wrestlers, especially back at that time, with a college degree, and also the forethought to protect themselves, knowing what this business can do to you. So I thought that was really, really interesting about him. And the jumping back and forth thing, I think he was still able to do that until he went from either Raw and Nitro on the same night. And the only reason I think he did that, it's rumored that he was, and this is another thing about him, is that he was a fiercely loyal friend. And it was rumored that he was so pissed off about what they did to Bret Hart that he took it upon himself to kind of like get a dig back into the WWF from going from Raw, which his contract had ended, to Nitro on the same night. And if he didn't do that, I feel like the WWE would have kept him closer at hand, close by, doing color, doing whatever, that his body wouldn't have gotten involved in it. I mean, I'm not saying the overdose wouldn't have happened. I'm not, psychic or anything, but I do think we would have heard more about Rick Rude during that time if that didn't happen necessarily. If that not a little rift in the WWE didn't really go down. But then again, Vince has forgiven people worse. So if he would have just lasted, who knows? He may have gotten that extra run that he was planning for, even past that. I mean, Vince is forgiving guys for a lot. I mean, I think I heard like one of the worst people that he hated was Jeff Jarrett. And, Jeff Jarrett got himself like a little match recently. It took a couple of decades. It took a while, but, he got there. So if Rude would have survived, who knows what would have happened.
Yes, for sure. It took Rick Rude a long time to get into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
It was, I think, 2017 or so, which, if you just think about who you could be, who's made it to the Hall of Fame, like, obviously he made such an impact. Yeah. He could have been in years before. But, that kind of leads us into maybe starting to think about rebooking his career, kind of rethinking it, which, it is a Hall of Fame career. So sometimes it's hard to go back and say, well, how do we change that to be what we wanted? But I think there's a lot left on the table with him. And I think it speaks to how amazing he was as a performer, both physically in the ring and on the mic, and just a presence. Like you said, he wasn't a plumber. He wasn't in that version of whatever type of wrestler Vince McMahon eventually would want. He's he is a character, but he's a very different type of character than even Hulk Hogan, who is a superhero. Ultimate Warrior is a superhero. He's in some ways not a super villain. You know, like maybe at times Macho Man was that, but Rick Rude is just top of the card, top heel in your company type of guy.
Yeah.
You know, and we look at that, like he was 29 when he joined the WWF. And a lot of times people don't realize in any sort of performing art, whether it's comedy, whether it's wrestling, that sometimes seasoning needs to happen. Yeah. And for him to be 29, you're getting him on the early end of his prime years.
Yeah.
Like he's not coming at 20 years old. He's not brand new, not green as grass, as they say. He's actually coming in probably a good time where you go, this is a guy we can build on. Mm-hmm. So by the time he's 31, 32, he's going to have some years in and really ready for a major push, maybe dealing for that championship. But by the time he's 32, he's gone. You know, he's out of there. Mm-hmm. And that's the first thing on my list to rebook him is keep him around. And it's hard to go back and change what happened in those first 3 years with him. I think that we can, because if you look at some of the stuff, like, you know, even his first WrestleMania, which was WrestleMania 4, he has a draw with Jake the Snake Roberts, which I don't know how you feel about draws, but draws and disqualification, like SummerSlam of that same year, he's got a win over Junkyard Dog and it's a DQ. Like that's boring. It's unfulfilled.
I think a draw and a DQ should only be for Raw. They should be for SmackDown. They should be for house shows to help build the program. But don't give me a draw or DQ at a pay-per-view. Like, come on, we all know what this is. A draw or a DQ happens naturally because two actually competing sides are so equally matched that one can't get the edge over the other. This is not what this is. This is a scripted athletic performance. Don't give me a draw. Don't give me a DQ. Once you give me that, that's a build for something else. And I paid my pay-per-view money to see either an end to this or a satisfying conclusion, maybe for another pay-per-view, which a draw and a DQ does not fall into that category at all. Maybe that's why there's been so few of them, but you know. Yeah.
I know when I was a kid and when you were younger too, that wrestling isn't like it is today, where there wasn't hours and hours and hours of wrestling on television, top guys wrestling every week, names that you knew. We would have Brooklyn Brawler versus Ravishing Rick Rude on a WWF Superstars on a Saturday. And that would be the only time you saw Rick Rude that month.
Yeah.
Because the next week it would be Mr. Perfect versus Barry Horowitz.
Yeah.
And that would be the main event. And then we got promos and that was about it. So for any sort of disqualification or countouts or draws, any of those type of things, they don't belong on pay-per-views, especially in this era where the pay-per-view WrestleMania 4.
One a month. Yeah, like one a month. I think, no. You only had one a month when the In Your House came around, other stuff came around. But before this, what we're talking about, I think it was 4 a year. It was the big 4, and that was it.
When he comes in, not even. They didn't even have the big 4 yet. His first full year, which is 1988, is WrestleMania 4, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series. And Survivor Series to me doesn't even really count because, especially in those days, it's just a mix of teams and it's not really one-on-one stuff. You know, they've changed the format of Survivor Series now, but like back then it was just like teams of 4, teams of 5 versus another team of 5. It was a way to see all these different stars for them to get a paycheck at Thanksgiving time.
Yeah.
But really WrestleMania and SummerSlam were the only major things. They didn't Royal Rumble early 89, you know, he's involved. But again, a Royal Rumble, you know, as it being part of if you're part of the Royal Rumble match, as they say, which I am vehemently opposed to that. I think that it is the Royal Rumble and that's the match, and the Royal Rumble pay-per-view. If you're going to have a suffix on there, it's going to be for that. It is not for the match. Because when we were kids, we just said the Royal Rumble, and we meant the 30-man Battle Royal.
That's the only thing that we talked about, because a title rarely changed hands at a Royal Rumble, and that's what a pay-per-view is measured on. What title changes hands and who shows up. And the Royal Rumble was not a pay-per-view where, you could expect a title change, really.
Yes, absolutely. And so seeing that, we've got that Royal Rumble, and then we're starting to get into, like, you had WrestleMania 5, SummerSlam again, Survivor Series. Then there was this No Holds Barred, the match, the movie type of thing, which is a one-off thing. They were doing that because No Holds Barred was coming out. But we're kind of settle into that 4 per year. And occasionally there would be something like this Tuesday in Texas or something like that. But the four a year, King of the Ring didn't even become part of that pay-per-view experience until 1993. So nothing that Rick Rude was involved in. Mm-hmm. So for them to have his first 2 major pay-per-views to be disqualifications or draws, that I think we can start rebooking right there. Mm-hmm. Is that the Jake the Snake thing's fun. That's a great way to start in on things. But I think that the Junkyard Dog thing, for SummerSlam, that there's no way that I'm doing that. I think that doesn't send a message of Rick Rude becoming one of your top heel for sure. It sends a message that, well, here's the guy that was a giant star 4 years ago, in Junkyard Dog, but he's clearly past his prime, and he can't even, he wins by DQ, but come on now, so I would put him in a SummerSlam match, maybe a little bit of a program around that time with somebody much more interesting, maybe a Bret Hart, because Bret Hart had not broken yet. He was still kind of in that Hart Foundation thing. You could have, because occasionally it would take people from those tag teams and have them in singles matches. Or I would even do like a extended thing with Paul Orndorff, because there was originally the Paul Orndorff thing where it was him and Rick Rude both being managed by Bobby Heenan, and it's bodies, who has the better body, who's going to get the most attention. That could have been drug out a little bit more. That could have been a WrestleMania match, or that could have been a SummerSlam match.
I think more so than the last time, our last rebooking, what we did was we rebooked the Invasion, where we could just plug out a few pieces and put them here and put them there and just wholly reimagine the Invasion and make it so much better. I think this rebooking is much harder because we have to change not only Rick Rude's run, we have to change everything about the business at the time. Because the problem that we have here is, back to what you said about the King of the Ring. The King of the Ring was the first thing, that and the Royal Rumble was actually more so the King of the Ring, because every guy that won the Royal Rumble was already an established guy. Mm-hmm. The King of the Ring is where guys on the cusp, not established yet, can really go and just say in one night, this guy is to be taken seriously. Why? Because you had to wrestle more than one match. You had to get through match after match after match. I remember when Bret Hart won it, I'm like, wow, this guy, Bret Hart was already on, but I remember this is concrete now. I remember when Stone Cold won it, like, wow, this guy is concrete now. But the problem is, during 89, 90, the undercard was not there. The middle card was not there. If he gets wins over Bret Hart, he gets wins over Hart Foundation Bret Hart. Great. With us, seeing into the future of what Bret Hart would become in 89 and 90, all that would have mattered was you got a good win over a tag team guy. If you beat Shawn Michaels, still, he was in the Rockers, you got a good win over a tag team guy. You got a good win over Paul Orndorff, who is no, but he's more of a wrestler's wrestler. You know what I mean? Like, wrestlers respect him. People who are, knee deep in these wrestling streets, they know who he is. But at that time, are those three quality enough wins to bump him up to the to the legitimacy of Hogan. So that's one big problem. The middle card isn't there enough for him to defeat middle card guys to be ascended to be taken legitimately for Hogan. That's one problem. Number two, let's say he does do that. You do have middle card guys to have that. Is Hogan letting him go over him clean? Because you have to remember, and Hogan was even worse in WCW. In WWF, Hogan decided who was beating him. He let the Warrior beat him because I guess Vince McMahon talked him into that, but even Warrior had to drop it back to Hogan because Warrior couldn't hold it. And I think part of Hogan's mind, he knew that. You have to be a tour de force kind of guy, a force of nature to go over Hogan. He's not letting the business progress. He's not letting other guys come up and get to that level once he's there. So what do you do about Hogan? Number three, what do you do about Vince? The reason Hogan was able to be that way is because Vince allowed it. You got to be big. You got to be this force of nature. You got to be this guy I can put all over popsicles, wrestling popsicles at the time, wrestling ice cream. That's the guy in lunchboxes, Hulkamania. That's the guy, the Ultimate Warrior. He had the aesthetic. You could have put him on anything, even though his promos were complete gibberish. You could put him on anything. The problem with Rude is a guy that's set up to climb in the WWE as it's constituted 5 to 6 years after he left. 89, 90, there's so many different things we would have to change. We would have to completely redo professional wrestling. Maybe not in WCW, because when they started, they had guys, but they were, to be honest, they were fledgling at the time. Not until the NWO was established did Nitro compete head to head. But we're talking a complete overhaul of the WWF as it was constituted between 89 and 90. So rebooking
let's do
Rick
it.
Rude, man. Let's do it. He needs quality competition. And I'm at a loss, and you're going to have to help me here. From 89 to 90, I personally don't believe that they respected the middle card enough. Have guys that Rick Rude can go through that division and the people say, all right, this guy is a real challenge. What do you think about that?
I think that, part of the middle card, upper middle card that happens shortly after Rude gets there is Ultimate Warrior is part of that, and Rick Rude. So once we get to that Rick Rude Ultimate Warrior, that's great. That's amazing. I think that's part of what made Rick Rude and Ultimate Warrior Hall of Famers is because there was a legitimate feud there where you looked at both guys. They're both body guys. They're both bodybuilders. They do have, different physiques. Rick Rude's got that tiny waist, whereas, Warrior didn't. He had piles of muscle on his body, but they both could go head to head. And obviously Rick Rude was better in the ring. He could lead him through the ring there. And so the problem with some of the middle card, though, is there's some great heels. So Mr. Perfect, great heel. You can't have him going up against Rick Rude. Roddy Piper is a baby face. He's kind of in and out of the company because he's doing movies. And so it's not as easy to just go, hey, we'll have a Piper feud because, but that could have been a good one for Rick Rude as with Piper as a baby face, because they both can talk, they both can be insulting, and they can have a great match together. And Rick Rude can come out on top because he's just a bigger man, physically. He could overpower him, have Piper do the job for him. Might be hard, but hey, there's a possibility there. That's a great match that could be together. But he's not going to go up against Honky Tonk Man. Right. That's another top heel, but he's not going to go against him. Jake Roberts, it's kind of good that he was able to go up against Jake Roberts but Jake the Snake could kind of go in and out of both of those worlds. Yeah. He was heel, babyface, he could do both. Yeah. But another middle card guy, well, a couple of them, Brutus Beefcake and Davey Boy Smith, I think are both in that babyface territory, middle card, upper middle card. They can go against each other. There's also like a Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Those are some of the few that I think could actually be a good matchup for Rick Rude. That it's not just, there's the Tito Santana's out there, but, and Tito Santana's a great Intercontinental champion, but I feel like Tito that was his ceiling, was going to be Intercontinental. Whereas for Rick Rude, that felt like his floor.
Yeah.
And so there's Ricky Steamboat, but Ricky Steamboat's kind of in and out. He would have been great. So that's the only problem I see with this era. And obviously, as you were saying before, Hulk Hogan's not giving up his spot.
Yeah.
And it's probably good to keep him away from Hogan rather than to have him chewed up and eaten up by Hogan.
Yeah.
And then what do you have left? Because that happened to some folks like Big Boss Man. They have their run, they have their feud. Then he's dropped down the middle card guy and he never can work his way back up. He's never top of the card guy again.
Yeah. I think the names you throw out, I agree with, but not at the time that we're discussing. I think the biggest thing with rebooking Rick Rude is we have to undo his injury. He has to stay healthy, past or stay with the WWE, or stay relatively involved and able to go past 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, right on the cusp when you got Shawn Michaels coming on and you got Bret Hart coming on and you got these guys that he can really go and not only do his deal with and be a heel with and get over on these guys, or maybe go back to back 50-50 booking with these guys, because all these guys go on to be world champion. And then you got Rick Rude, who didn't lose any, let's say he's in a feud with them in the mid 90s, dropping a match here or there, but not losing any respect to them. You got him set up to go on that world championship run. I think the problem with Warrior is there's no way to, going back to our time frame now, we're back in 89, we're back in 90. With Warrior, there's no way to have a match or a program with Warrior with both people staying on the same respect level once it's over. Because for you to do that, you have to have a long match with a guy. You have to be equally matched. You have to let the audience see two guys are at the same level. They just can't get the one up on each other. When Warrior was running through people, that was for a design. He couldn't wrestle. He couldn't long. He couldn't. He had to run through people. And what I also hear is that he didn't listen to anything in the ring. So like you said, a more seasoned guy, it was nearly impossible to bring him on. I think Bobby Heenan told the story where it was Warrior and it was Andre the Giant. And Andre the Giant, they wrestled, I think, 3 nights in a row. And Andre told him, I'm going to throw you in the ropes, come off and do this. The first night, he came off the ropes. He didn't do what Andre said. Second night, he came off the ropes. He didn't do what Andre said. Third night, he came off the ropes. Andre changed it up and just put his fist out and just knocked him clear, nearly unconscious. So that's the guy who you're dealing with. It's not a guy who gets brought along when he's in the ring because he doesn't listen. So I think Rude faces so many problems that are not his fault, man. Like this is a rebooking where we have to imagine so many things are different for it to work. And I don't have a problem with that. Number one, I think, like we said, okay, let's keep him away from Hogan. I think that was a great idea. All right, let's keep him away from Hogan. So Hogan could still be there. The injury can't happen to him. He needs to stay healthy. So like you said, that bouncing back and forth between when he first started in 97, where we kind of, tossed everything. Well, not tossed everything, but kind of did what he did to get, to stick it to the WWF for Bret Hart. He needs to stay healthy during that run, because the guys who you're talking about, that they work in the mid 90s. I don't think they work in 89. I don't think they work in 90, because even if you beat all of them, as they say in the business, what'd you do? You beat up on a couple of tomato cans. Like you're not going anywhere with that. Strictly, and I'm just saying 89 and 90. Everything you said fits perfectly for a creation of a top star from maybe 94 on. 89 and 90, like I said, you got Bret, the tag team specialist. You got Shawn Michaels, the tag team specialist. You got British Bulldog, which I don't think he was singles at the time. I think he was part of the British Bulldogs, 89. He was also tag team in 89 and 90. Correct me if I'm wrong, go ahead. But I think like at that time, the guys who you're saying he has to beat, I still think it works for him during that 89 and 90. what he did in WCW to hold the world championship over Sting a few times, that helped him. But I do think he needs to get back to WWF, and that injury, we got to find a way to wipe that out. Other way, I don't think we're getting a successful rebooking here with that injury still on the table.
Well, we're going to take the injury off the table now.
Yeah, we have
This
to.
is how we're going to do it.
I think we have to.
So, like I said, I like the Warrior feud. So we're going to kind of stick with the Warrior feud.
Yeah.
So after that Warrior feud, it's not long after that where he's hurt, right? So he doesn't really have a major feud after Warrior, and partly he just is hurt, so he can't just come back and let's continue that on, or I'll try to have some more stuff going on with Warrior. It's like he's hurt, he needs some time to heal, but that's not a career ending injury. That's just a short-term injury. So we're going to smooth everything over.
All right.
We're going to say, sorry, you're not giving your notice. We're not going to let you go. We're going to keep you. We'll give you a couple extra bucks for whatever you're upset about, whether your name was on a program that you weren't there or not. We're going to take care of you. Don't worry about that. So that gets him back into the picture in that 91 era. So we'll just kind of assume that he's out for a year or whatever, 6 months, a year. He's back in 91. And so if we look at who the champion is for that 1991 reign. So we start with Sergeant Slaughter. He's beaten Warrior, with interference from Macho King. We then have Hulk Hogan winning it back. Then we have Undertaker winning it very briefly. Yeah. A few days later, he drops it back to Hulk Hogan. And then it's vacated. That's the year of 1991. So Rick Rude is not going to be in that discussion. Yeah. He's not going to be messing with that. They're not going to go with Rick Rude during that. But this is where I think things start to get interesting, where he could be in the world title picture.
Yeah.
Ric Flair wins the Royal Rumble and becomes the heavyweight champion. Yeah. Randy Savage beats him at WrestleMania 8 and becomes the champion. Right there is where this era starts, where I think Rick Rude can be a major force. He's just come back from injury, so he's kind of fresh again. Mm-hmm. And we see him doing it in WCW, where he comes in there, he's fresh. We haven't seen him in a while. He wins the U.S. title. Then he starts competing for the heavyweight championship. Yep. We've got that right there, where the champions in 92, like I said, mm-hmm. Ric Flair, Randy Savage, back to Ric Flair, and then Bret Hart. Mm-hmm. That's great. He can fit in there. He can go against Bret Hart. He can go against Randy Savage. 93, we're starting at Yokozuna. We got Hulk Hogan again, but in Yokozuna, that's all the champions of 93 is Yokozuna, Hulk Hogan, and back to Yokozuna. So essentially it's basically Yokozuna all of 93. Yeah. But Yokozuna is not, yes, he's huge and he's somebody who you'd be pushing. He just had a short shelf life because he got so big. Mm-hmm. So we're right in 94, Bret Hart, Bob Backlund, Diesel, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels in 96, and Psycho Sid. You're telling me that Bob Backlund is going to be the champion when you could have Rick Rude doing it? Bret Hart could, they needed Bob Backlund as a transition between Bret Hart and Diesel because they wanted two baby faces with those guys and Bob Backlund to be the heel. Rick Rude could be the guy that transitions there.
Even before then, you absolutely read my mind, because what I was thinking is his first title reign should be in replacement, or not should be, because Bret Hart is one of my all-time favorite guys, but I felt like it would have been a more natural fit. Or if you want to look at the guys who were making the decision at the time, if given the choice between Rick Rude taking the belt off of Ric Flair, or Bret Hart taking the belt off of Ric Flair, they'd have probably put Rick Rude in that situation first, because they make decisions off of these guys who wrestle. Let's look at the bodies here. Bret Hart was never a body. Bret Hart was a technician. And still, even when he won the title, there were still questions about, can a guy this size or doing what he's doing hold the title? So I think if it came down to Bret Hart and Rick Rude getting the world title, I think that's Rick Rude's in. If he's healthy, I think that's his first title reign. He takes it off of Ric Flair after Ric Flair won it. I think that's the first title reign there. And going down the line, as you said, yeah, between Batman and Rick Rude, I'd say Rick Rude. But now it's very interesting now. I personally believe that Bret Hart would have got his hands on the title somewhere down the line. Do you think Rick Rude beating Ric Flair for the title changes the trajectory of Bret Hart's career? I'm not saying he's a complete mid-carder now, but I'm saying, is he this legendary Bret the Hitman Hart? Is he a 5-time champion with Rick Rude still in the picture? I think yes, but maybe a title reign, 3-time champion, maybe, because Bret was just so different, and where the business was going, he was the natural progression. He was just, I looked at wrestling and he was the first person who I thought was an actual fighter. He just outsmarted people. That was the first person and I've been watching wrestling my whole life. Bret Hart was the first person I looked at and actually thought that. So I still think he would have that success. But now if you got Rick Rude taking that first title reign away from Bret Hart, the Ric Flair, I think the trajectory of his career changes.
I think that it does to some degree, but I actually think maybe it even lifts it a little bit, because we already established in early on in this episode, Rick Rude and Bret Hart were good friends.
Yeah.
So
So okay, the
Rick
champion
Rude's
picks who he wants to work with. Yeah.
He's going to push for that. He's going to say, I want to work with Bret Hart, and probably vice versa. Bret Hart's going to want to work with Rick Rude. They both are going to be great in the ring. They're different, but they can work well together. They're going to put on some great matches. I kind of even liken it to Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels. They always had these great matches. I think Rick Rude and Bret Hart would have been some legendary matches. Yeah. Because if Rick Rude and Ultimate Warrior are legendary, just think if you put another worker in with Rick Rude. Yeah. And so you've got all of that mix in the early 90s. And I think he's even going to be maybe a little bit more, bringing a little more of the Attitude Era earlier. You kind of alluded to that. So because he's not let go, or he doesn't leave, they don't let him go. Then all this 90s stuff. Well, 94 is when he was hurt for real in WCW. He was only 36 years old right then. Yeah. Well, since he didn't leave, he's not doing, a match where there's this weird platform for him to hit his back on. They're sticking with the rings that they're working with, and he's not going to be doing an Undertaker match like Shawn Michaels, because I don't envision Rick Rude ever being a babyface. If he is, it's going to be in the Attitude Era. It's going to be like a Stone Cold.
When they're accepting anti-heroes now. Yeah.
Right. And maybe we'll get there in a few minutes, but as we're going through, he could have some great matches with Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels is coming on. So just being the heel to those two guys and allowing those guys to not have to work with each other all of the time, you can stretch that stuff out where you've got Rick Rude, Shawn Michaels, Rick Rude, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, all in the mix where it's stretched out a little bit. We've got them peppered over these different pay-per-views. They're all great worked matches. And
the gimmicks are so, now that you say it, the gimmicks of Rick Rude and Shawn Michaels are so similar, but the only difference is Rick Rude will, have sex with your wife and answer you at the front door. And Shawn Michaels will probably scurry out the back door after cheating with your wife. But, they're so similar that I still think both gimmicks could survive, but I do think the similarities, if existed at the same time, would have, people would have pointed that out. So.
For sure. There would be some element of that. Now, Rick Rude, like we established, he's a bigger, larger man.
Yes.
But Shawn Michaels can do that. There's Razor Ramon. Razor Ramon is another example of somebody that Rick Rude could be working with.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would probably put him with a Diesel or a Psycho Sid, like those larger men, because as a heel, even when those guys are baby faces, I feel like he's more interesting if he's physically imposing to another guy. I'm not going to have him with Undertaker, But now we're getting into like 97. The champions like Bret Hart, Psycho Sid, Undertaker, back to Bret Hart. But then we're flipping it between Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels. And then in March of 98, Stone Cold Steve Austin becomes champion. And that's been a long time coming. That's been, a year and a half build towards him being champion. Now you've got another guy where Shawn Michaels, Stone Cold, Rick Rude, and Bret Hart, they're all can be part of this, the Attitude Era, but we're also good workers that provide something very unique to each of them. And he was already in that Attitude Era. Like he comes back from that injury and he's a mouthpiece for DX. Well, so he's already there. Like he's got the attitude about him. They clearly think this guy can talk. He's part of the NWO also. So I think that you've got a great mixture there. He can be going, then we're getting into the Rock Mankind era as well. Mick Foley, that I think he could go against those guys. So I have him as champion as early as 92. Yeah. And kind of flip-flop. And I think he could have had one of those 4 championship reigns, kind of like 4 or 5, where he's flipping it. He's the guy that kind of, if you need to go from Bret Hart to Shawn Michaels, you can flip the championship there. You don't have to turn one of them babyface for a match. Or, Shawn Michaels did a lot of that where it's like, well, he'll be heel for this guy and babyface for that guy. You don't have to do that as much because you got Rick Rude, the heel, throughout there, that through line. He can be the heel for Stone Cold Steve Austin. He can also be, I think going in that, I still have him in DX. Like a Shawn Michaels, a Rick Rude, and Triple H. DX as more of a threesome with China is still where he's working. He's actually getting in the ring is maybe more interesting than him just being the mouthpiece of them.
Yeah, but I think that changes the chemistry, and I don't think there's enough oxygen in that room. With a healthy, active Rick Rude still in the title picture or orbiting the WWF picture, he's probably looking at a faction to be something that elevates him, whereas that faction really elevated it elevated Shawn, but it also put Triple H in a good place. I didn't see Triple H's career coming when he was in DX. I just thought Triple H was a carry my bags kind of guy when he was in DX. So the way DX is constituted, it was pivotal. It was monumental. I think it put icing on the cake of HBK's career. I don't think HBK needed it. It put icing on that cake. It was the cake for Triple H. He needed that. But if you have somebody now who is now still actively competing for the title picture, and you got Shawn Michaels and you got Triple H, and China sort of came on once Shawn was gone. So she would have had her time to shine because now you're down Shawn. But you got all those guys now with an active wrestler who we both agree would be at the top of the card. It's like, how many microphones you got? And also you got to consider his temperament. Him and Bret Hart being friends means they're kind of like the buttoned up guys. So you're kind of arguing for a Bret Hart type personality to be in DX. So you got to remember that. So while he was doing all these things in the ring, outside of the ring, hanging out with these guys, he's more Bret Hart than he is Shawn Michaels and Triple H. So I just don't know how that works. If he's not active, fine. Yeah, he could leave him in DX. But if he's active and circling the title picture, I can't see him giving up so much ground to these guys. And I can't see Shawn Michaels playing second fiddle at that point in his career to Rick Rude, which is what would have had to have happened.
Ooh, see, I see it like this. I think it works great because yes, there's there might be some friction, but friction can create storylines there. And so, he's already on the mic. He's on the mic anyway. And so he's able to talk. He's able to wrestle now. So it's not just him talking, going, look at these guys. He can also hop in matches there. Maybe he's going with The Rock, or he's going Stone Cold, or he's going Bret Hart. You know, you can have that mixing of the guys. Sometimes Triple H is going, you know, having a match with somebody. Sometimes it's Rick Rude. Sometimes it's Shawn Michaels. You can do, maybe there's a tag team championship. So if you keep Shawn Michaels as champion, maybe Rick Rude and Triple H can be a tag team, go for the belts there. So they've got, you know, multiple belts there. They can try to get the IC title in for Triple H. And then if Shawn Michaels, when he does leave, because he's going to leave, even if he doesn't quite get hurt the same way, he's going to leave. Like, you know, that's just what was going to happen with Shawn Michaels. He was going to burn out. He was going to be gone. So now you have this void. The leader of the group, Shawn Michaels, is gone now. So now who takes leadership? Well, Rick Rude. Well, I'm the senior guy. This is going to be my group. And Triple H is like, hold on.
Yeah, that's great. I don't see, you still have HBK as the leader, but with an active, healthy Rick Rude, I don't think Shawn Michaels is the leader. I don't think HBK is the leader. That's why I said I think the dynamic of the group changes. I don't know, man. I can't see DX needing any change, but it's definitely going to change. I can't see, because, you know, those guys are all ego, and you have to be. Because, you know, you're working in a profession where any sign of weakness, you know, gets you bumped down the card. And especially if you're, you know, in the world title picture, credibility is everything. So you can be in a group and be, I don't know, maybe they could have been equals, but, you know, he would have had to have been the leader. I got to say his ego and just his head for the business would not have allowed him to only take leadership once HBK leaves. I can't see that.
Well, this is the way I see it. This is how you get it. How you get Rick Rude to fall in line with these type of things.
Yeah,
he's almost 40, and you've already kind of shown Macho Man the door at basically the same age. So it's like, we can have all these great storylines with you and Shawn Michaels and Triple H, or you can go to WCW.
Well, you know, that's putting a gun to the guy's head. And I think he would have took that. I think he would have went to WCW, because looking at what happened, he went to WCW anyway. You know, so even if in this scenario where he's not injured and he's at the top of the card, I think he might have went to WCW anyway, because around that time when he left, DX was still operating, but also the whole Montreal screw job went down. So that's not something that we can ignore, because we've also talked about the friendship between, you know, Rick Rude and Bret Hart. So if you're going to take that hardline stance with him, and then things occurred how they did naturally occur, he probably would have taken that option of, fine, I'll go elsewhere. I'm not staying second fiddle to this guy or to this group. I'm the guy who should be running this group, and you screwed over my friend. I'm gone. So I don't know if he's the type of guy. Remember, there's a guy who has an insurance policy on his body now. So this is not the type of guy who's just like, oh, I don't need to work. You know, I'm afraid of being out of a job or whatever. WCW was still there paying guys. And, you know, that most definitely could have been a line that he took. Not saying it wouldn't have worked, but I'm saying it's a 50-50 shot. And he's not one of these guys that's just like, man, I'm just going to stay here for a paycheck. He did leave. He's left multiple times. So.
Oh, he did.
But, yeah.
But this is what happens in this scenario, is because he's such good friends with Bret Hart, and he's working now very closely with Shawn Michaels, and he's there. He doesn't allow the relationship between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels to turn into a shoot behind the scenes and a real fight. So it stays professional. It stays a work the entire time. So the Montreal screw job never happens with Rick Rude being in there.
That's possible, that they may not have gotten into a backstage fight, but you gotta remember the Montreal screw job. I don't blame Shawn Michaels that much in that. It's between that happened because of Vince McMahon, that happened because of Bret Hart. Shawn Michaels was just the tool that they used. Vince McMahon promised Bret Hart a 20-year contract, something crazy like that. And Brett took it. And actually, Brett took less money than he would have gotten in the WCW offer. He took that from WWF, and Vince, they call him a genius. I don't agree with that, but he reneged on it very quickly. And that's what, forced Brett to go over to WCW. That was Vince's fault. Brett not wanting to drop the title in Canada, that's Brett's fault. As adults, as knowing what the business is, you drop the title where you drop the title. It doesn't matter if you drop it in Canada, in your hometown and stuff. I know some people still sign on to that. I don't. As a kid, I did. As a kid, being a Bret Hart stan, which I still personally am, it's his business. It's a television show. If he wants you to drop the title in Canada, you drop the title in Canada. You kind of force this guy's hand. But long story short, whether Bret or Shawn have a smoother relationship behind the scenes, I still think the Montreal Screwjob happens, because from what I've heard about Shawn at the time, he wasn't the most principled guy. And even if you watch the footage of the Montreal Screwjob, he told Bret straight to his face that he didn't know about it. Triple H told Bret straight to his face he didn't know about it. They told Bret's family, who was in attendance, his wife, they didn't know anything about it. Only to find out afterwards they knew everything about it. So
See,
I still think it happens.
This is where I diverge from you.
Man.
This is our paths are going two different directions here.
Yeah.
Because I think Rick Rude, all the stories about Rick Rude are legitimate tough guy. Yeah. Also
loyal,
and also beat up Ultimate Warrior on a Warrior's way to the top. Like, he's not afraid of top guys. He's not afraid of putting some hands on some people.
Yeah.
And so I think the big thing with Bret Hart not wanting to lose it in Canada, I think it was he didn't like Shawn Michaels. He thought, their relationship had gotten strained. Shawn Michaels had been acting like a jerk behind the scenes in many ways to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And if you have Rick Rude standing next to you, you're not going to be a jerk to Bret Hart, because he's going to open hand slap you every time you did that. And you can whine and cry to Vince, but he's going to choke you out whenever Vince isn't looking. So
is that like the Undertaker story where he had to stand at the apron with his fist taped up so Shawn would drop the title to Stone Cold?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's what it is, right? Yeah.
And I bet you that Rick Rude and Undertaker would have gotten along very well. Yeah. And you've got more than one enforcer watching people's backs back there. Mm-hmm. I think it might have smoothed things out a little bit, so that's where I see it. Now I see him, that DX run, you could have a little bit of fun with it, but I don't see him wrestling into the 2000s. Mm-hmm. I don't see him when the, WWF or WWE at the time, and WCW and ECW all kind of merge into this one big thing in the mid 2000s. I don't see him going that long. I think 40 years old, I'm not going to have him die, but I do think that around 40 is about.
Let's not put that into the rebooking.
Right. That's not going to
remove that.
Yeah. But I do think that that's about the time that he's going to be done in general. And I think because he's had a healthier career, he's not on the same painkillers. He doesn't need the money now. He's been a top guy in WWF through a couple eras here. He's now been in the company for 13 years or so. He's had a good run. So after that DX stuff, once he kind of passes the torch to Triple H in my scenario, then it's kind of off to, into the sunset a bit. Now he can do some managing. Now he can be a commentator. He'd be a great manager in that era, when we only have like Paul Heyman essentially going forward, can kind of help transition people in to that new era. Once we start getting the Cenas and the Randy Orton would have been a great,
you had it right. You had it right the first time. Once we get the Cenas, because there's nobody else in that time period but John Cena. Like, he just absorbed everything, and that's the way they had it. So
yeah, well, that's great. Then John Cena can be that side of the equation, and a Randy Orton maybe managed by Rick Rude. Maybe you've got the Evolution thing. Randy Orton spins off of that. maybe he's taken away by Rick Rude. Rick Rude makes his comeback as a manager and takes Randy Orton away from Evolution. There's a little bit of a thing between him and Triple H again. This time he's got the younger guy that he's going to be managing up against him. So that's where I round off the booking for Ravishing Rick Rude. I gave him a lot more years in WWF/WWE.
Yeah.
And I think he could have, he obviously already had a Hall of Fame career, but just take some of those great WCW years, put him in the WWF, and also taken away that injury. Yeah. Man, he could have major shakeup to the top of the more toys you have to play with, more toys Vince has to play with, the more stories he can get out of that. So that's why I'm wrapping.
Right. And that was right around the time where Vince abandoned it. Well, he never abandoned it, but he was kind of lesser on. You don't have to look like Goliath to, make a major run. So I think, like I said, man, he was just 5 or 6 years away from being in the optimal time for the company, for somebody like him, who talked like him, who looked like him, everything.
Absolutely. Well, I like that we added some extra years to his career. I also like just envisioning him in a different role than he got to be, because he never just got over the hump, at least in WWF. And for a lot of wrestling fans, especially that era, the WWF was it. So he did get over the hump in WCW, and he had some great years there. But I think they're in some ways largely forgotten, because he's kind of this bridge between Ric Flair, Sting, and then the NWO, the Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan's coming in right as he's getting injured. He doesn't have any run with him. He doesn't have that Macho Man run. He doesn't have that secondary Ric Flair run, NWO guys. He doesn't have any of that. He comes in, he's just a mouthpiece by that time. Yeah. So,
and just real quick, just wanted to point out, nobody's going to lose any sleep over this, but a healthy Rick Rude means Val Venus doesn't exist. He does not exist. No one's crying over losing Val Venus, but I just realized that's a gimmick that's not even allowed to exist with a healthy Rick Rude still occupying space in the WWF.
Yeah, you don't need it.
I'll take it. If that's the trade-off, I'll happily take it.
Yeah, you don't need it, because Rick Rude is kind of like a Val Venus and Shawn Michaels. In the same, in one package. So, all right. Well, Ray, I think we got it done for this week.
We rebooked it. We rebooked his career.
So, thank you again for being on the show. And anything you want to plug before you get out of here? Where can people find you? Your Twitter handle?
They could find me at Marshall Comic. Otherwise at home. Just hoping for everybody to get vaccines to be safe so we could turn back to the clubs.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Do you agree with our booking? Would you do it differently? Well, I'm at Comedian Luke on all social media platforms, and you can actually at Rebooking TT on Twitter and Rebooking the Territory on Facebook. You can also find out about future episodes there. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and please give us a 5-star review. It truly helps.